Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com. I've been thinking about differences between performances, difference from one performance to the latest performance specifically, because I see in the comments all the time people saying things like, well, this may not be the best version, but it's different from all of the others, and so I enjoy it for that reason. Well, it's perfectly fine to enjoy it for that reason. It came up most recently, I think, in talking about John Wilson's horrendous Daphnis and Chloe, where some of you mentioned, oh, well, it's different from all the other Daphni out there. Well, yes, it is different. It's also worse. But the issue is this. The issue I want you to think about is this. Before you jump onto something and say, well, I know it's different, because I have to digress a little bit here. It's wonderful to recognize things that are different, isn't it? Isn't it fun? I mean, when you know a work really well and you can hear a bunch of different recordings and you recognize the things that are different between them all, I mean, you have such a sense of fulfillment. I do anyway. I became a critic because I was puzzled by differences between performances of the first movement of Beethoven's Fifth. I had the Klemperer recording. It's very slow. You know that one. And then I had Karajan. Well, Karajan hates woodwinds. Klemperer loves woodwinds. And in the middle of the development section, it's going da-da-da-da-da-da-dum. And then there are all these woodwind parts going da-da-dum, doo-doo-doo, dee-dee-dee, dee-dee-dee, which I always heard in the Klemperer recording. And in the Karajan recording, you don't hear any of that. You don't hear it at all. And I thought to myself, my God, is it a different work? Is he playing a different piece, a different score? What? Why? What was the difference? It fascinated me. And so I found out, and the rest is history. And here I am, because listening for differences is really an exciting thing. But the issue is not recognizing difference. The issue is valuing them, thinking that something is good because you've heard the differences. That's something you have to be a little more careful of, I think, when you're talking about new recordings, because there's the joy in listening and the joy in making comparisons, but then there are those value judgments. Now, I have to make a judgment. I have to decide, are those differences good or are they bad? You only have to decide, oh, I like hearing the differences, and hearing a difference is good, on its face. And I get it. I really get it. But I also understand that once you've recognized those differences, once you've heard them, they get old very, very quickly. That cannot be the reason that you're listening to the work. Beneath all of these differences, sometimes they're huge, sometimes they're not huge, is the music itself, your understanding of it, your view of it, your vision of it, which is a composite, likely, of every performance you've ever heard and loved. And then there are all these new performances, and it's fine for you to say, okay, well, you hated it, but I think it's okay because it's different from all the other ones I've ever heard. Well, that's okay, but that's not a reason, in my view, to recommend it to someone else. That's a reason for you to enjoy the experience of listening to it, which is great. But I'm assuming that's true of all of us. There's no reason to make a point of it. In my view, there really isn't, because as soon as you listen to it again, the difference is not important anymore. Those differences have to survive over years. And the more you listen to them, the less significant they become, the less fresh they are. And 5 years from now, you may hear it and go, oh, what did I care about this one? Okay, so it's a little bit different from the other one. But do I ever take it out and listen to it as my preferred version of the work, or one of my 24 preferred versions of the work? That's what you have to ask yourself. Where are you going to be in a few years' time? Because I've had quite enough experience in my 40 some odd years doing this to know that often as not, just these minor differences are not reason enough to justify giving the piece an exalted status in your pantheon of whatever the work is. Now, let me give you an example of how I went through this, because we all do. When Celibidache's stuff was first issued, remember? EMI issued, all of those Munich recordings. In fact, I have one right here. Wait a minute. Let me just pop it out. Here it is. Remember these? They were in bigger boxes originally because they were individual CDs, but then they re-released them in these slimmer boxes. This is his Sacred Music and Opera thing. Oh, it's just awful. My God, it's horrible. But, at the time, I wrote a big, long article full of philosophical bullshit where I called Celibidache the last of the mad genius conductors. And I talked about how, we're never going to see his ilk again, and the music business has become quite standardized, and, with these cookie cutter artists out there. Well, there are cookie cutter artists, and I was totally wrong. I was completely wrong. Look, we had the Roger Norringtons of the world. We have Karensis, with his BS nonsense. We have all of these people. They could be just as wacky as Celibidache was, and there is always someone dumb enough to drink the Kool-Aid, to suck up to whatever they're offering. And it happens all the time. So the more things change, the more they change, the more they stay the same. I was totally wrong about Celibidache, but the point is, I heard these things and they were a revelation. I mean, who could play it that slow and do all this weird stuff? And it was so much fun to listen to these pieces I knew really well and hear what some whack job was going to do to them. I mean, it was almost Dadaistic, right? And now I listen to it and I'm just like, oh God, it's awful. It's just awful because it doesn't withstand repetition. You may place yourself in a bubble where, you're, like I said, you drank the Kool-Aid, you're going to be an acolyte of this guy, and there will always be the cult figures and their followers. But for most of us normal people, hearing a Beethoven symphony played at 50% the normal tempo, and I'm not talking about period instrument normal tempo, I'm talking about normal tempo, and hearing strange balances and weird, it was the same thing with Glenn Gould's, Mozart, for example. Just to hear someone do things for the sake of doing them, even when they do it superbly, may be interesting and it may be fascinating. And, he might be a genius in his manipulations. But when you want to get the expressive meaning and impact of that work in question, you're not going to listen to Celibidache. You're not going to listen to Glenn Gould's Mozart. You're just not. You're not. And so when you hear something where the differences are huge like that, well, we can talk about them being party records or bizarre or extraordinary for that reason, because there's just stuff out there. They're just nuts. But when the differences are small, as opposed to what these guys are doing, when the differences are just these normal quotidian differences in interpretation with, one movement may stand out a little more than the others, or maybe an inner line comes out somewhere and you get all excited about it because you've heard it. And you say, well, I enjoyed this performance. And so, maybe me, trashed it. And I don't think so because I heard this. Well, you really owe it to yourself an opportunity to see how you're going to feel a little bit more before you decide to recommend it to someone else, because that someone else may go out there on your recommendation and purchase or waste time listening to it and hear what you heard and think, oh, it's so different. And then in a year, you're going to forget about the entire experience. And you may regret the fact that you ever thought it was any good in the first place. I'm just throwing these ideas out there because, we're all now in our way, especially today, critics. I mean, some of us, like moi, do it professionally or semi-professionally, but others of us, we participate in these discussions. We have very serious and I think very informed discussions about different pieces of music, which are very intelligent and based on tremendous experience and love of the works in question. And so we have an opportunity not just to share our opinion, but also to persuade others. And with the element of persuasion comes a certain responsibility, a responsibility to yourself, to the others, to the work, to try and focus on those elements that really do matter, and opinions that are going to be more than one-off things. No one's going to be 100% right. No one's going to get it right all the time. No one's going to know how they're going to feel about things 10 or 20 or 30 years down the road. We're always in a state of becoming, aren't we? But I think we are smart enough collectively, and I know you are, to evaluate just how significant the points that you're making really are and how significant they will be in future, given your knowledge of the music of the work in question. So just keep that in mind. I'm just throwing it out there. I've been thinking about it recently, and because when I see these comments, there's so much I continue to learn from you, and I know that you say you're learning from me, and I think the level of conversation is very, very high. I really do. I think we're really, really up there in being informative and useful and smart and helpful to people who don't know as much as we do about particular works, and people who do know but may not have noticed things that some of you notice that I don't notice. It happens all the time. So I'm always trying to elevate the level of discourse, and this is something that I think if we pay a little attention to it, we could really do it. We can really make a slight adjustment in the way that we talk about these pieces when we encounter newness, and think about what that means and how important it is, and just a thought. It's out there for your delectation. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me and letting me blather on about this like this. I just hope it gave you a little food for thought. Bye-bye.